going around the room now. Okay. First of all, we'd like to welcome you all here and thank you for coming. This is a very unique occasion. We have three of the national environmental groups and ourselves, Greenpeace, Earthwatch and Antashka, and ourselves, Cork Environmental Alliance, united here today to demonstrate the nationwide concern of the Irish environmental groups and the populations that we represent. The accident at Rinnaskiddy last week could have been worse. We were told it wouldn't happen, but it did. It easily could have been a catastrophe, and how close were we to total disaster we don't know and may never know. We have here on the table today Claire O'Grady-Walsh, Toxics Campaigner for Greenpeace, Jeremy Waits from Earthwatch, Leslie Atkins from Antashka, Joe Noonan, who's Legal Advisor to Cork Environmental Alliance and Chairman of the Board of Directors of Greenpeace Ireland, and we have Willie Hart, who is a resident from Rinnaskiddy, who is here available to answer your questions. Jared Chambers is sitting in the audience, who was a witness to the dumping of the chemicals last week, and Father Jared Galvin, the curate at Rinnaskiddy, has been doing his best to get here. He may not be able to come, but he has made his phone number available for members of the media if you would like to contact him in the afternoon. I'll give you that number now. It's called 378063, and he wishes to express his concern on behalf of his parishioners for the need for information in the area. He said to me this morning that we have become complacent about the dangers that we're living beside, and this has brought it home to us. We're each going to give very short statements, hoping that there will be a discussion afterwards and leave plenty of time for questions. One thing that has changed this week, instead of the controversy in Cork being surrounding jobs and the environment, there's a new element added to the equation, and that is the issue of public safety. Cork Environmental Alliance is the Minister for Environmental Protection has failed to invoke Section 105 of the EPA Act. This section would give the EPA the statutory powers to hold a small inquiry into the events before, during and after the Hickson accident last Friday. If the EPA is being denied that opportunity to exercise the powers vested in the EPA, Cork Environmental Alliance will organise a public forum for all interested parties to provide their own accounts of the events. If necessary, we will organise an independent public inquiry. We need to get at the truth. Why is the Minister afraid to have a public inquiry? Is he afraid of what might come out? The implications of last week's event are not just an issue confined to one or two villages. They concern the wider Cork Harbour area and raise fundamental issues about the national industrial policy regarding issues of public health, protection of the environment and the failure to enforce planning and environmental laws. Some of the major outstanding questions is: how does Cork County Council propose to evacuate Cork Harbour in the event of a major disaster? How are they going to evacuate people who are dispersed on islands and peninsulas throughout the harbour? Are they seriously relying on the diversion of 50 CIE buses to go down to the harbour to evacuate the residents? How do they expect 8,000 people to get over the island of Cove across one single bridge, the Bell Valley Bridge in Cove? Is the answers to those questions the reason why we have never been given access to the evacuation plan? Did the firefighters at Hickson's know the amount of chemicals that were stored at the plant last week and the types of chemicals? The practices of some of the chemical industry in Cork has resulted in a divided community here. It's divided by fears for health and safety and the environment on the one hand, and the need for economic development and jobs on the other. The sense of conflict has compromised the true economic potential of Cork Harbour. Attempts have been made by some interests to rejig the image of Cork, but it's not a superficial image that should be our concern, it's the everyday reality for people living in Cork Harbour. I finish by saying that it's impossible to gag an entire community. Thank you very much. Now I'll hand you over to Leslie Atkins of Antashka.
The recent explosion and fire at Cork Harbour area has given great cause of concern, and Antashka wished to draw attention to the ever-present risks of such industries. Antashka Cork is concerned at the two incidents at chemical plants in the Cork Harbour area and is relieved that there is no immediate loss of life. It is of vital importance that a full and open public inquiry be established immediately, and this inquiry should not only investigate those two accidents, but every aspect of safety in all such plants around the harbour. Such incidents could also occur on Little Island, and people there also live in close proximity to similar and other industries. The NET plant at Marina Point is another source of concern. There have already been on a number of occasions emissions of ammonia. Should a major accident occur, there would be a great number of people would be put at risk, as would the whole of Fota Island. Antarctica has repeatedly called attention to the fact that the planning authority may write into planning permissions stringent conditions. However, there are still inadequate resources for enforcing these conditions and for penalising those that infringe them. The foregoing statement was made by Antarctica earlier in the week. However, as a result of observations and a statement made by the Cork County Council in relation to the materials involved in the Hickson fire, a further statement must be made. Much of the material was either burned or escaped consisted of chlorinated solvents. These are dangerous in themselves, but even more so when burned in uncontrolled conditions, giving rise to a whole series of products from hydrochloric acid to dioxins. The dangers are threefold. Sea disposal. This gives dilution but introduces toxic materials to the world's largest food chain, where it may be concentrated by biological magnification. 2. Surface runoff. Great potential danger to all life forms, and it may be noted that a number of the shore plants in the area are now showing signs of damage as a result of this runoff. By far the most dangerous, however, as regards long term, is the damage to the groundwater aquifer. The underlying substrate in this area is boulder clay overlying Carboniferous limestone. We call for an immediate census of all wells and boreholes in the area, and thereafter testing of the water for at least the next 2 years. We know there is an overall level of dioxins in the soils in the area. There should be immediate further testing. Antarctica does not seek to create a witch hunt, but seeks a complete review of the conditions of operation of all the chemical plants within the harbour area. To this end, it is, in our opinion, it is necessary to set up immediately a sworn inquiry.
We don't have that statement. Maybe we can get copies of that one.
Yes, that we arrange for that, certainly.
Now, German Ways of Earthwatch.
Having regard to what's been said by the previous two speakers, I don't intend to address the specific situation arising out of the incidents last week in Cork Harbour, but rather to look at the longer-term implications for legislation, beyond endorsing the general list of demands which I think has been circulated already, which is shared by all the organisations represented here. Earthwatch believes that the Irish legislative regime is totally inadequate to prevent a potential Irish bhopal occurring. And we're calling on the government to urgently strengthen legislation to minimise the risk of such accidents taking place. And there are two areas of legislation that we're particularly concerned about. The first is the legislation relating to environmental impact assessment. Under the present legislation, both EC and Irish domestic legislation, certain categories of environmentally significant projects are required to go through an environmental impact assessment procedure. But that procedure only relates to routine emissions, or rather projected routine emissions from proposed plants. It doesn't deal with the issue of non-routine emissions such as might arise in an accident scenario. This is a major deficiency in both sets of legislation, one that should be remedied. What it means is that effectively the potential risks from a proposed chemical plants in an accident scenario are simply not part of the impact assessment procedure. So it means that you could have a potential bhopal being set up on your doorstep, but as long as the projected actual emissions from that plant are fairly modest, the local authority is not required to take into account the non-routine emissions which might arise in an accident situation. risk assessment is effectively out of bounds to the planning process, and that's a very serious deficiency that should be addressed. The European Commission is reviewing the EC Directive on Environmental Impact Assessment, and we're also calling on the Commission to incorporate risk assessment as an integral part of the environmental impact assessment procedure. But meanwhile, we believe that the Irish Government should unilaterally incorporate such considerations in the impact assessment procedure. The second area of legislation which the recent accidents have highlighted and shown up deficiencies in is the whole area of freedom of information. It is generally recognised that freedom of information, public access to information, is an important tool in strengthening environmental protection. That's not just the belief of environmental organisations, it's actually a principle well established that's actually enshrined in the EC Directive on Freedom of Information. But when you look at the whole area of risk assessment, the provisions of freedom of information legislation, again both at EC level and at domestic level, are completely inadequate. The directive provides that information which relates to activities which are likely to have an impact on the environment are covered, but there can be arguments about what's likely. So you could have a chemical plant being established where there was quite a small probability of an accident happening, but the actual consequences of that accident could be very, very large indeed, and this arguably would not be covered. But there's a further and more immediate problem with freedom of information legislation, and that relates to the exemption provisions for information affecting matters affecting commercial and industrial confidentiality. And that's a clause which we are very concerned is wide open to abuse. Earthwatch believes that where emissions have entered the public domain, the information about those emissions should also become part of the public domain, even where commercial confidentiality is involved. But we would go further than that. In addition, we believe that where there is a significant threat to the environment, in other words, not actual emissions, but a significant threat of emissions, the public also have a right to the information to enable them to assess the level of that threat and take whatever measures they want, for example, moving away from the area if they're very concerned about it. And this information should be made available to the public on the same basis as the information otherwise provided in the directive. In the case of the inquiries, the various inquiries being carried out in relation to last week's accidents in the Cork Harbour area, the information which has been made available to the various bodies carrying out these inquiries should also be made available to the public. We don't feel it would be enough just for the public simply to have access to the final reports. We believe that the information on which those reports are based should also be available to the public. And as regards commercial confidentiality, the bottom line is that shareholders' profits should not be allowed to take precedence over the public's right to know about significant threats to which they're exposed.
Thank you. I'll introduce Claire.
Good morning, everybody. I think that most of you are aware of what has happened over the last number of weeks, so I'm not going to go into the whole hazards of the fire. I just want to say that for Greenpeace, we're an international and very optimistic environmental organisation. And so what I want to do today, weeks later if you like, is to say we're looking for that vision of pain in Ireland at the moment. And for us, all over the world, we're fighting for clean production. And that is really, to put, if you like, to deal with this jobs versus environment thing, particularly in Ireland. And just to put it in context, I think for us here in Cork particularly, where you have a lot of toxic waste producing industries, it is not necessary for industry to operate like that. And I just yesterday got a very interesting pack from a company who are a Swedish company, and they have assets in the United States and in Germany and in Mullingar in Ireland. And on the back, chlorine-free. They've just gotten out of the use of chlorine, out of the use of PVC. They're the yellow flower in amongst all of the accidents, in amongst all of the red flowers. That's what this environmental lobby is about. It is about clean production. It is about the fundamental rights of people to work, but to have clean air and water. That is an issue about environmental democracy. And that is what has happened in the last number of weeks, not just since this unfortunate explosion, but also in terms of the tour that Greenpeace had around the country in our ship, where we were saying to people, Ireland, from the Ural Mountains to the Atlantic Ocean, there isn't another island like it. We were protesting, but we were celebrating something about this country. And the people in Cork have fought a very lone battle a lot of the time, just like the Hanahans fought a lone battle in the 80s. It is despicable. It is despicable that the public representatives have not represented their people properly in relation to their air and their water being contaminated. And there is a fundamental dishonesty by local authorities, or on behalf of the local authorities and the government, to not tell people the full facts. Now, we have in front of us today some analytical results already through from our Exeter laboratory. Some chemicals having been found that were not detected or else not reported by Cork County Council in their analysis of firewater, which they supervised and authorised the dumping of down a sewer many hours after the explosion at Hickson's. And that is a very, very, very dangerous situation for us. But I think it also draws up a question about the inquiry and the need for a full sworn public inquiry, because the council in this case may actually be equally to blame as the company. And that is a very, very important point for us today. Our participation in this inquiry is essential now. And like I said on prime time last night, it is not just an inquiry for the sake of an inquiry. It is an inquiry set in the historical context of an absolute inability and incompetence or lack of willpower on behalf of government over the last 2 decades to deal with the problem of pollution. One must remember that the Hanrahan family, it was actually the acid test case. The EPA and their ability to have an inquiry is not the acid test case. We've had many acid test cases in the past. The Hanrahans and their lone battle against Mercksharp and Dunn, who went unprosecuted for blowing up their incinerator in the early 80s. Unprosecuted for emission after emission after emission that poisoned 220 cows in the Golden Vale of Ireland. That is a disgrace that has been very, very slow to come out in the public domain. And there have been many accidents here before. And then we had a big inquiry for Sandoz back in 1990, and a complete reversal of all that was decided there. So I think there are a number of issues that Ireland needs to take very, very seriously. So the least that we expect is to be taken seriously and to be dealt with in an honest way. That is the least the people of Cork deserve, and it is the least that the people of Ireland and the future generations coming forward. For the 21st century, we're 7 years old. The government have actually signed and committed themselves at various conventions internationally to phasing out the use of toxic chemicals and cancer-causing chemicals. Our message to them today is do it now. Do not even wait until the year 2000 like you have committed yourself to doing. We're talking about very serious commitments made by governments who in their wisdom decided to phase out some of the chemicals that have been found in the Hickson's fire because they cause cancer. Some leading chlorine chemists in Germany have actually stated in recent months that if they knew what chlorine chemistry would have done back in the 60s, they would have never developed the industry. We are looking at the next stage of the Industrial Revolution, which other more enlightened people in industry even are already doing. The next stage of the Industrial Revolution is clean production. We need mandatory audits. We need the information that these other groups here today have called for and have consistently lobbied for. And we need the phasing out of the toxic chemicals from industry. That is the only way forward. Thank you.
Okay, might I add that Willie Hart is also here to answer your questions. And as far as I know, is not a member of any environmental groups, but today to show us to you.
Before we go any further, you have figures back from there, from Oxford, is it?
From Exeter University.
Exeter, yeah.
Paul is available for interview with anybody.
Are you releasing the figures on a sheet of paper?
If you read the thing down, he says that he's actually going to release a report later in the day that's going to quantify that at the moment. And I think actually one of the things that Paul did want to mention just here this morning, Dr. Paul Johnson, that is, was the fact that last night as they worked through the night on these results, in fact they had to dilute, a 100-fold dilution was necessary of the concentrations of the chemicals because it was going to blow up the machine, it was so toxic, whatever it was being put into, so to avoid shutdown. So basically, number one, they have found chemicals that weren't actually detected by Cork County Council, and number two, they have found that there are very high concentrations of chemicals like chlorobenzene, which obviously is a known cancer-causing chemical that wasn't detected by Cork County Council. council. So, as I say, Paul is a toxicologist, and if you want to speak with him, his number is on the top of that sheet. It's 0044392, and then the rest of the number.
What time are we going to get those figures there?
I don't know, I think you should talk to Paul, because as I say, you've been working through the night on it, but I mean, you've got a bit to go on there anyway. He says in it like that during the course of the day. So I can't speak for him, you know. I'm trying to craft the whip with him all night over it, like, you know, so I think that it's just a matter of time.
But you're saying that the initial analysis suggests that the council either didn't know or didn't report the town council, is that it?
But either, yeah, that's it. Or else their analytical machinery is unable to pick up some things. That's one of the things that Paul has often pointed out, because in our laboratory in Exeter we have actually a computer system attached to the whole setup that allows us to look for concentrations that the Cork County Council's machinery doesn't actually.
Claire, while you continue to call for a public sworn inquiry, and while it's undoubtedly public concern, I can't detect any groundswell of support for a sworn public inquiry. I get the impression from the public, with the greatest respect to Joe, that they don't want what they perceive to be another lawyer's bonanza.
I could make a point in relation to that, which might just deal with that issue.
Right, just to finish my question, that you appear to be, while your case is good, calling for a public sworn inquiry doesn't, to me, appear to have support in the heart of communities.
That would be very understandable for the reason that you say. I think everybody is fed up to the teeth with the idea of the sort of public inquiry that involves huge drains on the taxpayers' purse, and quite rightly so. And I think the way around that is very clearly obvious to us now. The industry spokesman has said that they're prepared to fully cooperate. You can see that the environmental groups and the residents have every interest in being fully cooperative. If everybody is prepared to be genuinely cooperative with an inquiry, you don't need lawyers. Why not have an inquiry with a ban on lawyers' participation?
So are you suggesting that the grounds for an inquiry for what you're actually calling for could be changed?
No, we're saying a sworn inquiry, but we're saying you don't need lawyers. You don't need the expense of lawyers. It's a common sense issue, and common sense can take the place of common law as far as this inquiry is concerned.
I wonder whether Willie has anything to say there on that.
Is there a precedent for Joe for this kind of inquiry?
There has been inquiries.
Inquiry without lawyers, an inquiry without a judge, an inquiry without...
You don't have to... This is an unprecedented situation as far as Cork Harbour is concerned. There's no reason to reach for a precedent. Why not be imaginative about the problem and find a way around it? If cost is a problem, this is a way around it. I think, for example, if you want to go further, if you want to look at the cost of, say, bringing in witnesses, if the community wants to get independent expert advice on analysis and so on, you could do that, I estimate, for less than 1% of the IDA grant to Angus in 1984. The Cork Examiner reported that £7.4 million of IDA grant money was given to Angus when it was established. For 1% of that, you could get all the witnesses that you need and all the evidence that you need to present a good, factual base of information to the inquiry holder.
You would have, in a situation where you would have no lawyers, you would certainly have the expertise to cross-examine witnesses. Who would have the expertise in that case to cross-examine you? Would you expect the other members of the public to come in and take you on, for instance?
I have no role to play in an inquiry without lawyers. I don't see how I come into it.
But
the community are well able to speak for themselves.
It would work, you think?
It would work, yes.
Claire, can I take one further point which interests me? Public representatives have not made a huge amount of running so far. You appear to be obviously critical from what you said of their role so far in representing the public.
Well, obviously last night I was on prime time and I was expecting to have the minister sitting next to me, for example, and I discovered 15 minutes before I went on that he had chickened out. And I think that's disgraceful. I mean, to be honest, in relation to last night's thing, the chemical industry are on one side of this, certainly. They produce chemicals in the harbour, and that's their job, and that's their work. But if you like, we're talking a crow with the government, really. We're saying, you made a commitment in Paris, for example, on marine pollution to phase these chemicals out. You made a law in Ireland on freedom of access to information. Your local authorities are not adhering to that. I had loads of questions for the Minister. And he was nowhere to be found. He was gone. The same as last week, he came down to Cork Harbour after the fire, and he spoke to everybody except the residents. And that is disgraceful. He went in and he spoke behind closed doors, without journalists, without RT, into Hickson's, in to talk to the managers, in to talk to the machinery of the chemical industry, and to the Cork County Council. But he never spoke to his people. And he represents us. We put him there. And that's what I feel is really, really important for us to grapple with here. It's like, because Hanlon also spoke about this as well. Gareth Fitzgerald writes about it in his book, that Justin Keating was sent down as a vet and that to look at their farm. And he was pulled out of there by the civil servants because he understood it so clearly. And they sent somebody else down instead, another politician, who went to everybody except the Hanlons. And what we're saying is that in order for them to understand and make a wise judgment as our government, they have to speak to everybody. And they must speak to the environmental groups, and they must speak to the residents, because the residents live in the fallout area. That's all.
Can I add to that in Cork this week, the politicians have been conspicuous by their absence as well. There are certain politicians who are very quick to jump into the media to attack environmentalists who raise these questions, raise these issues. And this week it was laughable to see them there, again attacking environmentalists. We didn't cause the explosion. This was akin to shooting the messenger this week.
Clara and Geraldine, can I put a question to the two of you? You talk about there, Geraldine, about it being laughable, the politicians about their absence. But it could also be deemed as laughable that the environmentalists appear to think that everybody's lying to us. I mean, surely this can't be serious. It's like a paranoid delusion that no matter what they say, they must be telling lies.
But that's why I started when he was saying that we're actually a fundamentally optimistic organisation. And, I think that's an extremely important thing. It's a very positive movement. And actually, I did want to add about the public representatives, because John Brown is just one person who didn't turn up last night. There are a number of politicians actually in the country who are very concerned about this issue. And we have no political axe to grind. We're not a political party. So I think it's very important for us to know here that we need them. What we're saying to them is actually, we need you to understand this issue and to start working out how we get more tar pits, how we get more clean industry here. You know what I mean? How we build a future for the next generation. That's really what we're talking about. And I think that there are a lot of people out there, not just in political life, but in economic life and that as well, who are starting, the penny is dropping. And I think it's particularly important in Ireland at the moment, as the Enterprise and Employment Department are going to get 4 billion of the structural funding, that they take up the fact that Greenpeace said to them, we delivered to them, a CFC-free fridge that German scientists and Greenpeace scientists made. It's an alternative, it's there, manufactured in Ireland. Better still manufactured in the west of Ireland. That's what we said to them. Do you know what I mean? The alternatives are there. There are innovative, energetic people in the world who are working on alternatives. There are insurance companies should be developed in this country, for example, that deal in clean alternatives, clean energy. That's what insurance companies are getting into. I think there is an enormous potential for us and our politicians. That's what I say, it's the vision thing. The penny needs to drop with them, that we don't have to be put into this very unfair choice to make our people choose between poison or poverty.
Right, but to get back to...
Can I answer as well?
Yeah, sure.
In Cork, we have got reassurances for 20 years. Everything that has ever happened, we're told it's fine. I think when you look at the examples of where the public has been involved, for instance, in the Sanders Law hearing, there was dramatic improvements in those licences as a result of public participation. And I think I'd have to put that question back to you. Why on earth are the public not involved? Why shouldn't they be? Why should this be conducted behind closed doors? As I said earlier, are they afraid of what's being said? We live there. It's our lives that are at risk. We should be there.
While we're going on, could I suggest that the second statement from Natasha might be copied in the meantime while we're talking? Could we?
If you've got a copy of that, somebody say something about that to the hotel and asking them to copy it. Jeremy would like to make a comment. Do you want the first one that was read out or the second one?
The second one. The
handwritten, okay?
Just briefly to add to what was said there, it's not a question of environmental organisations being paranoid or unduly suspicious. It's just a well-established fact that when in the US the toxic release inventory legislation was brought in, the environmental performance of companies simply improved. It's just as simple as that when companies are under the spotlight, their performance improves. There's nothing more to it than that, really.
Geraldine? Yes. Could I say something? Yes.
about information from the council, and I live in Crosshaven, and I'm one of the people who live down there who have suffered for a long time from the emissions from the factories in Cork Harbour. My name is Anne Oldsman. Now, on the 28th of October, I wrote to Kieran O'Brien saying, over the last couple of weeks I have made numerous calls to the air laboratory about the bad smells being experienced here in Crosshaven. I have been told each time that the complaint is noted, but yet the smells continue. Could you tell me what is causing the smells, please, and are they detrimental to my health? Now, I wrote that on the 28th of October, and I still haven't had the letter even acknowledged. Now, information. This is what we want. I live there. So as the interviewer said, politicians criticising politicians, I would say that let us get information from them. I also wrote when they asked for there was scoping in Cork Harbour, way back in November 91. Submissions were asked from the local people. I wrote in a submission on the 21st. It was acknowledged on the 15th of January 91. I wrote back the 11th of January 91, and I still have not got a reply to my questions. No.
Could I ask about one or other of the press releases refers to the fact that if the government does not respond along the lines you wish, you'll have your own, and one or other of the organisations are suggesting their own inquiry. I can find it in the... You're right. You're going to have your own inquiry. What format will that take, and would you reasonably expect the County Council, for instance, and the industries to come in voluntarily to a private inquiry?
It's not a private inquiry, it's a public inquiry, and they have promised us openness, but I will let Joe answer.
The idea of that, behind that suggestion is to really do what has not happened so far. In other words, give a forum for the public and for any member of the community affected by the incidents last week to come in and give their own statement. It's really to give a platform for the public to give their own witness as to what they experienced. It's not in the sense of an inquiry going to find out what caused the explosion. Obviously that's impossible without cooperation and technical expertise. But it's to give a platform for the public for their voice to be heard. That's the idea.
Who would decide?
It would be quite, I think, easy at this stage to get an eminent independent person to come down and share that.
Joe, could I just take you on one further point? Information appears to be key to what a lot of what I will say during the week. There have been accusations of an almost, I think one of the companies put an obsessive cult of secrecy, and one can't deny that the chemical companies have been secretive in the past. Do you think that there is this cult of secrecy still evident?
I'm afraid it is, and I think it would crack overnight if the people in charge of the information, both at local authority level and in company level, would realise, particularly at local authority level, that the public can be their eyes and ears. See, there's a great fear of the public, and there's a great underestimating of the intelligence of the public, I think, at local authority level, where they fear if they give out information about a particular substance, people will panic because this can do that or the other in huge quantities. And I think that underestimates the intelligence of the people in Cork Harbour, that if they gave out the information, there would be a huge number of people around the harbour ready then to report incidents, to be on the side of the regulators, which is the way it should be. And I think that penny hasn't dropped yet in Cork Harbour with Cork County Council and probably with other local authorities around the country. And the sooner it drops, the better. And if this accident last week helps that realisation to dawn, then some good will have come out of it.
One final point to anybody on the table who might take it. From research on the ground in the past few days in the harbour, it appears to me there has been genuine concern and genuine fear amongst residents about evacuation procedures. Has the County Council made any contact with any of the environment? I can find no trace amongst residents apart from the release of messages over local radio, but I can find no trace of evacuation procedures conveyed to anybody.
Yes.
Has any contact been made with the organisation?
There was no contact made to anyone as far as I know. Because a woman living, I suppose she's living about 300 yards away from the chemical factory, was never informed. It was her son informed last Friday morning. She'd be the nearest living to the chemical factory.
She's 90 years old.
And as far as the organisations here know, there is still no evacuation procedure available to the public.
Last year, after the two fires that were here, when I inaugurated the chemical storage plant at the plastics factory, We wrote to Cork County Council asking for access. We met with the Chief Environmental Officer at the time asking for access to it. We have never got it. And as I said, is it because they know that possibly an evacuation plan is very unlikely to work?
Just make one small point. As a politician, I hope that some of the points you made earlier won't be made about me personally, but I tend to think that part of the problem about enforcing environmental legislation is, first of all, it's not strong enough, and secondly, it's not being enforced effectively because of a lack of resources from central to local level. And I'm just wondering what kind of lessons can be learned to make sure that more resources are made available for public scrutiny, for local authorities to behave in somewhat of an effective way.
Do you think that there's enough public awareness generally in Ireland, Geraldine, about this whole problem? Or is it a situation where people feel it doesn't concern me because I'm not living near Cork Harbour, I'm not living near a plant, therefore it doesn't? I mean, are people being educated enough, do you think, about the whole situation?
Claire, representing a national organisation, having done the tour.
After our tour, I mean, and if people have time afterwards, it would be great if we could stay and watch an 18-minute film that we made for our tour around the country. And we got in the region of 80,000 signatures to a petition to stop toxic pollution in Ireland in the course of a 2.5-week tour. And that was just in 5 ports of call. And I think that people walked out of that film on the cinema on the ship, you know, and came out and just said, my goodness. Because I think that what we did was bring together the fact that Hanlon's Ring Clonmel, Cork is Cork Harbour, you have Arklow, you have children being born with upper limbs missing in around some chemical installations. With nobody knows why it is. And people all around the country, in Meath and the West of Ireland, you know what I mean, wherever there are actual toxic industry, there are problems. It's not substantiated, but what everybody is saying is it's not up to us to substantiate whether these people are in danger or actually destroying our health or not. And I think that people in Ireland are really, they're looking for the vision. And that's why I say we really do have a poverty of vision amongst people who are in charge. And that is what people are looking for. They want work, and they see that the choice is, the trade-off is toxic, the legacy is toxic.